We're laughing aloud now, magic in the air. Wands roll around us, cast away our care. Friends in the hallways, adventures we find. Spells and enchantments, trouble on our mind. That's so.
Are the Players Handbook sales as big as Wizards of the Coast claims? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, the OG GM, coming to you live from Site B at 8:14 in the morning on this, the second day of October. Spooky, 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 spooky. And it's Wednesday, which means it's time for That's So Wizards. That's So Wizards is filmed in front of a live studio audience consisting of Steve the Cat. All right, so the number one story going on with Wizards of the Coast this week is how many sales of the new Players Handbook have actually been made, as opposed to how many sales Wizards of the Coast claims have been made. So the actual numbers show us that, according to Wizards, it sold more copies than Tasha did. I don't know why they picked Tasha, and faster. So I'm not sure why that one. I guess at some point in time, Tasha's was the fastest number one seller out of their library. Who knows? When you're dealing with this section, book sales, product sales, the information is always a little hedged. If I learned anything from my billion years of working in retail, what the computer says and what actually is there are often two different things. The computer says we have 2 TVs in stock. Where? I've searched every inch of the store. Where are these 2 TVs, right? So Wizards would like us to believe that as of the posting of these articles, about 4,000 copies of Players Handbook 2024 have gone out the door. That's including maybe the 3,000 copies that they sold at Gen Con. Or it's not. Or they're saying, not counting Gen Con, we've sold about 4,000 copies between ship date and today. Unless you're counting those copies that sold at friendly local game stores the week before Players Handbooks hit the shelves, because remember, we broke our own street date and gave copies to those stores, and they were selling them a week before actual street date, which in the normal world would get you in trouble for breaking street date, but I guess Hasbro doesn't have to obey the normal rules, right? But let's just say between there and there, we got 3, 4, 5,000. Some amount of Players Handbooks have left their homes and gone off into the wilderness to have little adventures and do whatever, right? And Wizards of the Coast main thing is, this is the number one, this is the biggest, this is the fastest, and they've chosen Tasha's as the benchmark, okay? Now, according to the people who do these things, Tasha sold about 14K out of the gate. So if this was something that was considered a New York Times bestseller, Tasha's would be considered a New York Times bestseller because it sold 14K within the first 24 hours, as opposed to Players Handbook, which is the most popular, biggest seller, which only has sold anywhere between 4 and 6. Now, I know I'm dyslexic, so I get numbers wrong, but I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, 13 is higher than 6. So probably just something you shouldn't have said at all, Wizards. But if your point was Players Handbook sold faster in the exact same amount of time than Tasha's did, you're ignoring a whole lot of other things and factors, and you're also ignoring the fact that you already released copies. And a lot of people are jumping on Wizards because they say they're padding the numbers and that the actual numbers aren't as big as they claim. And in Wizards' defense, we would say, well, are you counting those first day sales at the friendly local game stores? Because remember, the friendly local game stores had it a week before Big Box. And are you also counting out the door sales at Gen Con? Because remember, there was 3,000 copies that sold over 3 days at Gen Con, of which Stephen Glicker took 8,000 because he had that whole stack and I like picking on him, right? So wibbly wobbly math. No way of knowing the exact numbers. Unfortunately, number padding, especially in this type of retail, is not an unknown practice. It's actual sales versus projected sales, actual stock versus projected stock. The projected stock is, again, going to the retail. According to the computer, according to projected stock, we have 2 TVs. According to actual stock, we don't have any TVs. Is that wrong? Well, if you worked retail as long as I did, you know to always subtract a number. Always subtract at least 1 from whatever the projected in stock says. So if the computer says 1, I don't have any. If the computer says 2, I might have 1. If Wizards of the Coast said they said X amount, well, actually they probably sold Y amount, but they've just padded the numbers. Projected sales versus actual sales versus end of quarter sales. Now, what Wizards really should do is wait to the end of the quarter. So between day 1, where Players Handbook was actually at big box stores, because I guess we're not counting friendly local game stores or Gen Con, till the day DM's Guide hits the shelves in November. So that would be your first selling quarter. We are assuming that the interest would fade from Players Handbook once DM's G got into the mix. So they should count. And then when DMG released, they should say, this is the #1 seller of Players Handbooks of D&D books of all time. And it's the fastest seller of all time. But for some reason, they compared it to Tasha's, except the numbers would say that Tasha sold more than Players Handbook. So why pick Tasha's? Anyways, is this an actual Wizards being sinister, or is this another example of the lack of communication that seems to be going in the organization lately? And now would be a good time to remind everybody that they're still looking to replace our boy Todd over at Wizards, a senior manager, brand publicity. Brand publicity? Isn't that what we're just talking about? I don't know. Maybe if you had a guy whose job it was to make sure these mistakes didn't happen, maybe people wouldn't be yelling at you going, "You're padding number, Wizard, you're lying about sales." But they're still looking to fill the position, and maybe had the position actually still been around, and maybe had they not fired all the people whose jobs it is to make sure things like this don't happen, maybe things wouldn't happen. So if you feel you have the various tools in your utility belt to fill out this position and be a senior manager of brand publicity, and you want to work for Wizards over in Renton, Washington, job's still available if you want to apply for it. Remember, how come you never hear about Wizards' other store? Nobody ever mentions Wizards of the Coast, Texas, right? And I think there's a third. Is there a third Wizards of the Coast? I know there's one in Texas. I know there's the one in Renton. I think there's a third. But you never hear about the other 2. You only hear about Seattle. So like Seattle is just the bad news magnet. Texas Wizards of the Coast never gets in trouble. All right, moving on to the next big story, which is, of course, strangely enough, the DMG. Wizards of the Coast's DMG, because as Wizards of the Coast, in their typical let's fire and forget sales philosophy, is already shilling the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is coming out November-ish. If you're interested in what it is, we've got our boy Chris Perkins. Chris Perkins, please blink twice if you are in trouble or just need a sandwich. So we're talking about the creating adventure section for about 5 minutes. He's talking about the creating campaign section for about another 3 minutes. Talking about the Greyhawk section for about 4 minutes, talking about the lore glossary for about 3 minutes, talking about the bastions. Obviously, Chris is really into the bastions, for he talks to that for about almost 8 minutes. Magic items, which is, of course, the core of the DMG, right? And crafting magic items. He goes into that for almost 4 minutes. Covers the tracking sheets and the various chapters for the remainder. So in the 40 minutes, the thing Chris talked about the most was the campaign. So what is the difference between creating adventures and creating campaigns, Chris? And then talking about Greyhawk. So the fluff is more important to Chris than the actual important stuff. Now, this comes off the this comes off of the controversy from our girl Jeannie D making her little video about I've never read the DMG except for the parts that I've actually read. You were wrong, D Driver and Dragons, but whatever. And now we've got another one, and we've got other people talking about the DMG. It's almost like Jeannie D knew she was going to be getting a preview copy of the DMG, so she made a video talking about the 5th edition DMG, which she didn't bother to read the entire thing. She only read the stuff that was pertinent to what she was doing, like most of us. And the new DMG, where she'll say, oh, but I've read completely page to page the new DMG because the 2024 6th edition DMG is so much better than the 2014 5th edition DMG. And I'm sure all the other people who get shill copies will say the same thing. So, yeah. Now you're probably like me and you're going, but Wizards, the ink isn't even dry on Player's Handbook 2024, and you're already talking about the Dungeon Master's Guide. Maybe give us some time to finish reading it and take it out for a test drive before you start trying to shove another book down our throats. But that's, as we know, that's not how Wizards of the Coast operates. They make a product, they put 110% behind that product for like a week or two. Like, that is the single most important thing. They get all the shills to make their positive comments and all the press to make the comics, and then they wait for all the people like me to make negative comments, and then like within 24 hours they just completely disavow and focus on the next one, which is now DMG. So as far as Wizards is concerned, they have let that child loose into the world, and they're no longer concerned about it. It will either succeed or fail on its own. It's time to focus on the new child. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to see that 110% super duper bandwagon behind the DMG, and then they'll forget about it and focus on what's ever next. And if it succeeds, they might cycle back to it. And if it fails, like, say, Vecna, they'll just forget it ever existed. They'll literally just forget it ever existed. Okay, so, hey, we got some comments. I love me with some comics. Dark Winter would ask, how am I today? I'm fine. Been wondering if they're panicking as their claims come across as ridiculous. I don't know if I don't know if this is, Wizards of the Coast being insidious and sinister, or just Wizards of the Coast being understaffed and lacking the bare essentials of interdepartment communication that allows things to happen like this. Because number padding, especially in retail, is not an unknown. When did D&D Beyond bought by Wizards? Last year? The year before? Given the layoffs, how many were left from that period? I don't know. I'd have to look it up. Print one or digital only? Print. If they said digital only, they could get away with that, but print run, nope. Hey, it's our good friend Stephen Glicker. He wants to answer that question. Hi, Stephen. Here's reports of them not being able to supply orders, claiming it wasn't paid for, which is ridiculous unless they don't have enough printed, which is more likely. They had at least 3,000 printed before the, hey, we can't send it to you because you don't have enough money in your account thingy happened. And then supply orders, well, they can blame that on the strike. which may or may not be happening. If they don't have enough orders, there's no reason to print them. I think they've been boosting without understanding what they're talking about. That could be. I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of new faces at Wizards who have no idea what's going on. Management by spreadsheet. The person's making the press release probably doesn't even know the facts. That is probably true. They're only becoming blah, blah. That's more likely dice tales. Didn't believe it. Well, Steven says he wants to answer the question, so we'll wait for Steven to answer the question, or if he wants to jump on, let me know. So where does that leave us in regards to Player's Handbook numbers versus DMG? I don't know. You asked what the question was. You said, hey, I can answer that question. And then what is the question? Unfortunately, when dealing with retail, it's hard to say. Yes, they are correct within the scope of BookScan. Well, BookScan would be a pretty accurate. I don't know. I think, Regis feeds. BookScan would get their information from the inventory companies like Regis and stuff like that. So we have to assume that BookScan is as close to correct as we can know in the weird, fuzzy world of retail sales. Again, padding numbers versus actual sales versus projected sales, day one sales versus week one sales versus district sales versus how many shipping sales versus how many are in stock. The computer says we have 2 TVs. We don't have any TVs. The computer said we have 3,000 copies of the Player's Handbook. We have 5. Where are the other 4,000, 2,000, whatever? Anyways, it just boils down to Wizards got numbers wrong. And is it them being insidious and padding numbers to make themselves look more important? Or is it simply just Wizards being Wizards because they're understaffed and run by goldfish who can't remember what they said the day before yesterday? Meanwhile, Chris Perkins already shilling the DM's guide, and I just want to send him a sandwich in the mail. Just get a sandwich, Chris. Take a vacation. Get some color. And finally, in things I never thought I'd see, stuff out of my own. They stated that it was the best-selling product of all time. They didn't say book. They didn't say hardcover. They said product. 4K versus 13K? I don't know. I mean, my math is wrong, but, in the past. Anyways, did you read about the Wizards of the Coast PETA crossover? Wizards of the Coast and PETA. People for the ethical treatment of animals, not the peanut butter. So this is a thing. No, sometimes I press the wrong button because I have a piece of crap computer, but thanks for asking. This is a thing that I never thought I'd see happen. I mean, we talk about all the time about merchandising, and yesterday we found that amazing G.I. Joe figure with the breakfast cereal. So D&D the Flamethrower. PETA has made D&D classes. They've made the Oath of Animal Liberation Paladin subclass, the Warden of the Wild Ranger subclass, and the Circle of Empathy Druid subclass. Circle of Empathy, isn't that Counselor Deanna Troi from the first season of Star Trek Next Generation? Oath of Animal Liberation. I will free you, animals! Warden of the Wild and Circle of Empathy. That's a cross promotion I never thought I'd see. good thing or bad thing? I mean, it's sad that PETA feels they need to sell out like this in order to draw attention to their cause, and there were probably better companies to hook their to rather than Wizards. But good because it gets more attention to PETA's cause, and that's an important thing, even though PETA sometimes does go a little extreme, like throwing paint at people or whatever, but damaging classic works of art, other things that you would look at and go, look, I want to support animals and animal conservation and animal sanctuaries, but vandalizing the Mona Lisa isn't going to get my sympathy, PETA. There's probably better ways to do it. Just keep showing that ad with the puppies and the Sarah McLachlan song, "In the Arms of a Stranger," and you'll get it. So yeah, we get a PETA crossover with Wizards, but we still don't have the official 50th anniversary T-shirt. Probably somebody. No, I would say somebody at PETA probably plays a D&D. Probably a couple of them play D&D, and they contacted Wizards and said, "Hey, can we do a thing?" And Wizards said, "Of course we can do a thing. Dungeons and Dragons is a lifestyle brand now. Remember, not a game. It makes perfect sense for us to cross promote with you, PETA, because remember, here at Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, we no longer believe that Dungeons and Dragons can make money on its own, and that the only way Dungeons and Dragons can make money going forward is the cross promotion and the leasing of the intellectual property. So please make your own stuff and cross promote with us, because now we can say, look, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, Dungeons and Dragons supports PETA. There'll be no more cruelty to animals in Dungeons and Dragons. Let's go not kill that dragon. Let's see if it wants to play fetch, and if we can get it over to the dragon rehabilitation station, and maybe it just needs to be fed up and get some vitamins, and then we can re-release it into the wild and everything will be okay. I mean, that's my sarcasm showing, I know, because PETA is something like I'm very, as a unmarried, childless cat dad, animal conservation is important to me. This just seems silly and pointless and nonsensical pandering, but who knows? Who knows? You mean Uni? Like, where is Uni? Yeah, where is Uni? And all the new stuff for the kids. Anyways, that's the weirdness for this week. Again, if you think you have the wherewithal to want to go work at Wizards of the Coast as a senior brand manager of publicity, it looks like they're still looking to fill that position. Remember, this is the guy who decided, he looked at his possible future career track at Wizards of the Coast Hasbro, and then he looked at every other possible job out there in Seattle / Northern California / America, and decided, of all the jobs I could take for leaving Wizards, because of we remember what he said about them, I'm going to go work in politics. I'm going to go work with politics, because in my mind, working for politicians, working in politics, working in the government of Seattle, working in the strangest, weirdest, most corrupt, dirtiest, bizarre form of organizations on the planet, U.S. government, is a better career choice than working for Wizards. Oh, sure, I might make less money, but look at all the free swag I'm going to get. And I can actually accomplish things for the Seattle government. And working for the Seattle government is better than working for Wizards of the Coast. Just saying that. All your choices, that was in. I guess at this point, you can just look at Wizard sales and go, we'll know what we know when we know. You can look at the PETA crossover and go, unnecessary pandering, but maybe some good will come out of it. And you can look at the poor guy who decided to work for politics instead of continue to work for Wizards of the Coast and go, dude, I get it. That's so Wizards!
There's nothing allowed now, magic in the air. Wands roll around us, cast away our care. Friends in the hallways, adventures we find. Spells and enchantments, trouble on our mind. That's so wizard, oh, 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 oh. Life is a spell we know. We're casting joy and glow, oh, oh,